Thank you, Rishka. Thank you for all of you, and I take this opportunity to thank all your respective embassies and the high commissions as well for allowing you all to participate in this fantastic discussion. I don't think in terms of the DAS Roundtable, anything can get bigger or better than all the top countries and the important allies of India in terms of the military and the strategic partnerships we have here on one stage. And this is going to be one fantastic session. I would say after the Vice and the Deputy Chiefs panel, the most powerful panel of the entire summit. The entire country will be watching it live on NewsX and the our regional channels as well. This is primarily basically to get more awareness within the bureaucratic, diplomatic, and the political structure, specifically here in India, as far as the views, how do other countries look at multiple projects related to India and the military and strategic affairs dimensions. So I'll start with let's address the elephant in the room, specifically in terms of India being one of the largest importer of the defense equipments. I want to start with Brigadier Thompson from the UK High Commission. What, in your opinion, sir, India, despite being home to the second highest number of engineers in the world, despite being the fastest growing major economy in the world, is the biggest importer of the defense equipments? And I'll start with you for the opening remarks, and then I would request anyone can chip in.
Thanks, Ash, and thanks for inviting the invitation to be here today. And sort of, I think we're acting as a critical friend to the MAKE program, which is it's a very constructive way to look at how to do business to make sure that people who share the same aspirations can come and have a discussion on it. I mean, essentially, the MAKE program is one about India moving up the value chain. And moving up the value chain doesn't happen quickly. That's the first thing that we need to note. It needs strategic patience, and there are many ways of moving up the value chain. You can invest in your own R&D and move up the value chain that way, which is where most of the developed countries, the way they've done it. Okay. You can take other people's intellectual property to move up the value chain, which India isn't doing, which is a good thing. Or you can import it. And that's what India has done in the past. But India now wants to move into a world where it moves up the value chain in its own right, in collaboration with technological partnerships with other countries. So the objective is noble, the objective is right. India's going about it in the right way. It's putting the right mechanisms in place. It's talking about the bureaucratic change that's required. And it's doing those things. But it just needs a little bit of strategic patience and a will to work with people, which is exactly what India is doing. But India will move up the value chain. It has fantastic engineers. It's got great intellectual capability in the country. It needs to retain some of those people in the country and stop exporting them to other countries where they do very, very well in high-tech organizations. And the way you incentivize them to stay in the country and invest in indigenous technology is another question which sits outside of defense. But perhaps the one thing that I would say will make a difference is how you incentivize those people who are outstanding engineers to stay in the country.
Okay. Can I want Captain Daniel? You feel in terms of the patience, India's the bureaucratic chain disruption that is taking place and the way it's shaping up, do you feel it's going to give enough timeline to be patient, or we have enough reasons, India have enough reasons to be impatient and try and take that leap? Either of you.
Yeah. I will try with my best English I can. Of course, it's not so easy sometimes. I think it was one of the points that the Prime Minister pushed in his program and also in his policy, that the ease to do business in India has to be raised. It has to be pushed, and I think it's going in a good way. But what I would like to underline is that the Indians themselves, they have to find their own way. They have to push their reforms to attract, to develop. What I discovered when I came first time in India is that India has a strong volunteer of autonomy. You want your own autonomic strategy. And this is a very good driving, willing for this. So when people ask me, is it easy to make some business in India? I say no. Sometimes it's very difficult. The Indian bureaucracy is very famous, but when I'm working with my own bureaucracy, it's the same. So I'm sure that the Brits, they have their own problems. So first, what I wanted to underline is that as foreigners, we don't have to be arrogant. We don't have to judge anybody. So we can advise, we can say that maybe it could be better like that or not, but the Indians themselves, they have to find and to push their own system. What I discover with my friends from the armed forces is that they are fighting with your own bureaucracy as I'm fighting with my own.
Yeah, Captain.
I would just make a comment, and I agree with I definitely agree with Ludo. You know, I would just make the comment, first of all, that very few, or I would say no countries really are completely self-reliant on their own defense capabilities. The United States imports defense capabilities from different countries. So does every other country on this represented on this dais here today. So it's important to remember that it is a process that you have to go out and look for the capabilities that you need at times. You won't necessarily be able to make everything yourself, and that's all right. India should be looking for the areas in which it wants to focus and spend energy on trying to develop those sectors first, perhaps. Now, when it comes to the timelines you mentioned, these timelines for development and timelines for approval, these timelines are not built for speed. I mean, these processes are not built for speed. They're really built for doing things very deliberately and safely and making sure that we're taking care to adhere to considerations of security and that kind of thing. So the timelines are deliberate. But I think what India really could stand to do to accelerate some of the timelines is work very closely with industry, to listen to them, to let industry work here in a more free and open market, and with a little less government oversight and a little less government pushing them in the right direction. Industry will find a way to develop here, with help at sometimes, but also with a lot more freedom and some less oversight, I think, too. So that's just my observation.
At least the French and the US guys should not compete as far as the business, the defense business with India is concerned. On that note, I would request Colonel Asaf to chip in here from Israel. Sir, there have been a lot of important induction as far as the Israeli platforms and the equipments are concerned, and have been very useful in recent past. In terms of the patients that Sir mentioned, India being the largest importer, one of the largest for sure in the defense, do you feel there's a need to move forward in terms of the speed and the policy that the Indian government has, and the solution for it? Is it going to go the strategic partnership way, which is the better way, the G2G, the B2B?
Okay, well, first, thank you for having me and for inviting us. I apologize for not wearing white. I feel stick out a little too much around here. I don't think there is a single solution to that question you just asked. There is no one route you can take, strategic partnership or B2B or G2G. There is no one simple solution. And also reflects with the previous question you've had, because there are no magic tricks. It's a transition period, takes time, and it's an evolution. And you can set your goals, and you can decide on where you focus on more and where you let the things just happen. But it's a process that takes time. You can't take a leap within an amount of years that can be counted in one hand. That's for the patients. Now, between the three different methods you've just mentioned, I think that each project or each issue should be discussed on whatever is best fitted for that. You know, some for very generic products or systems, probably anything would do. And if you go into more strategic, more sensitive issues, projects, technologies, partnerships. I think these will naturally be happening easier on a government level, either G2G or strategic partnerships, one of these two, because it's much harder to do them on a B2B way. So each case should be discussed and pick the perfect way for that.
Captain Simon, I want you to chip in here in terms of the solutions, as Colonel Saab mentioned that it could be, it changes with the time-to-time scenario. But in terms of the support, if you look at just the bilateral relation, what are the areas that I will start with you in terms of Australia can actually help Indian government, the Ministry of Defence, revive its defence manufacturing capabilities? And that would include obviously the private Indian players as well, and the partnership with the foreign private players as well. Captain, start with you.
Thanks, Ashish. I'd just like to firstly preface with these other 4 countries represented here. They're representing quite a large defence industrial base, whereas Australia, we're still trying to seek niche capabilities. And it's not often that I support my French colleague, but his comments with respect to ease of doing business is certainly one of the areas that Australia is trying to assist with India, especially as part of our Indian economic strategy. We're trying to work out how we're going to improve economic links. I'll get onto your question, but I'd also like to endorse my Israeli colleagues' comments with regards to a mix. There has to be a mix. From an Australian experience, we've had successful G2G or foreign military sales options with respect to MH60 Romeo and C-17, but we're also about to embark on a very large-scale naval shipbuilding program, which is going to extend for the next 30 years, which is an indigenous program. So I think, and we've had high-level visitors come to India and certainly have a look at the naval shipbuilding program. We're building a state-of-the-art shipyard in Adelaide, where we've looked at shipyards all around the world, and we've seen designs, and we've worked out what is the best way to design a shipyard. And in Osborne, in Adelaide, we've done that. So I think that is one particular example where we could certainly work with India, the Indian naval shipbuilding industry, and we could see some synergy there.
Since Captain Simon talked about the shipbuilding, I would like to bring in Brigadier Thompson here. The aircraft carrier has been a lot talked about topic in recent past as far as the India-UK military relations are concerned. Instead of selling it, do you feel the helping Indian Navy build constructed the way we are doing one such in Cochin shipyard, the Vikrant one that is being constructed? Do you feel in terms of just the business buying those heavy expensive assets for the Indian Navy at the same time very strategic and important is going to be the way forward, or the partnership, strategic partnership, the military partnership in terms of helping Indian MOD build these aspects?
So there's, I don't think that globally in the blue-collar engineering space, anybody is going to design or is going to build somebody else's ships in the future, because blue-collar workforce is a very important workforce for any country. The issue is in the white-collar engineering, and where the engineering intellectual property sits, and where programs have been de-risked, sensibly de-risked by people who are the prime movers, and you sell the engineering design to a country, but you then have a build in country. And that's what the UK is doing with Type 26. It's what its plan is. It's designed the Type 31E for export. It'll be white-collar designed in the UK, but the plan is that it can be built anywhere in the world. And I think there's a clear signal there that that is completely compliant with the Make in India proposition. And of course, we all have structures in our countries that are designed for ship design, shipbuilding, and it would be foolish for any country to deny the right of those organizations to get involved in the design and the build process of anything that is seen as a strategic investment. So I think the model for the future, certainly in the naval shipbuilding world, is that there will be pockets of white-collar engineering excellence where countries have invested and de-risked programs, but the build will be indigenous in any country, and that's the model that the UK supports.
Colonel Dumont, moving from the maritime to the air domain, which has been making a lot of headlines as far as Safran and few other companies offering to revive the Indian fighter jets engines. Is the same principle or the concept applies in that as well? Is the French ready for the revival of the Indian fighter jet engine programs? You're going to lose a lot of business if that happens.
You know, right now the aeronautical side is the most emblematic in our partnership, but I will extend it to the maritime because we did the same with the Scorpion program in Mumbai. So you mentioned about the engines. I will not focus only on one example. As we said before, India now has ambition to become a major partner, but also its own builder, developer, and producer as materials. So the example of Safran is very emblematic because we propose to the Indian governments to develop a generation of engines that it took us around 40 years to reach step by step. And I think it's the same for either UK or the US. It's not a step that you can just reach in 1 or 2 years, of course. So the aim is more or less to bring India to reach this step in less than 10 years. So it's a very ambitious step, but it's a very important thing. So now I will say that the decision is inside the Indian. The decision is in the Indian side, and they have to look what they can gain, what they can do in this partnership. But I will come more broadly about what we do with India. All the time, our aim, and it's just factual, it's not promotion of my country. What we did is we develop relations built on sharing the technology. So the Make in India, the transfer of technology, has begun a long time ago. If you look just the example of the Mirage 2000, a lot of aircrafts were sold. My ambassador was talking this morning about the Uragan, but after it continued with the Mirage 2000 and the upgrade. I don't remember exactly the numbers, but a few of them were upgraded in France just to teach to the Indian engineers to do it. And after it was done by HAL in Bangalore. So this is the perfect proof of the developing capabilities and how to enter in a new area for engine, aircraft, for different technology, maritime or aeronautical.
Is it specifically in sync, in line with the Make in India? Or it's with the Make in India, or is going to be, or the idea that you're proposing is a little away or deviation from Make in India?
You know, for me, Make in India is a policy, a global policy, what I see from outside, and being not a specialist. But it has, as I said, it has begun really before. So the idea is to reach, same idea as I began before, with an autonomy. Industrial autonomy, strategic autonomy, decision autonomy.
Okay. Captain Daniel, how's Make in India seen in US in terms of the positives, negatives? We do talk a lot about, at least here in India, but how is it seen there abroad? Not in just US, I'm sure you would have got feedback from other countries as well. How is Make in India seen from outside?
Well, I tell you, I speak to industry a lot when they come to visit here, and there's a lot of US industry that is not only already doing business here in India, but there's a lot of industry that is interested in starting a business in India. And if I speak with them, the first thing I talk to them about is the importance of Make in India to them if they want to be successful in doing business in India. And The larger OEMs that are already here in country, they already understand that. And they understand that India is growing in relevance when it comes to exports and when it comes to basically developing a business case for Make in India. So, you know, a company like Boeing is going to manufacture, I would say, is currently manufacturing Apache fuselages here. Soon, India will be the sole producer of Apache fuselages. Lockheed Martin is looking at doing all their F-16 wings in India. Company like BAE is assembling and will soon produce M777s here in India. So these companies don't do this because it's mandated, although you know the offsets at some degree do drive companies to try to do projects here in India. These companies are doing this because they see the business case here. They see the talent pool. They see the labor force and the gains that can be made based on the large pool of people that are here, and they see the market. And so companies are doing this, and I think India's eventually going to reach a tipping point where Make in India is no longer it's no longer something that people feel compelled to do. It's something that they're pulled to do. And I would say that because there's a draw. India's already exporting about almost $2 billion worth of defense goods a year. And you know, the U.S. is we're a big benefiter of that, actually. So I think that when I talk to companies, I don't necessarily have to convince them of anything. I think they understand.
Yeah, Colonel Saab.
I had a few words from an Israeli perspective, and as you know, Israel is we're a tiny state, and our history has made us very innovative and very big on bringing up solutions and technologies. But one thing that is we're not so great in is the mass production, and it's a large scale. And from an Israeli perspective, the Make in India makes sense to both sides, both the Indian side and the Israeli one. And I think the biggest challenge that there is with Make in India, at least right now, from our perspective, is because the process is still very long and the bureaucracy is still very deep. Then how do you make the companies, the industries, feel that it's worthwhile to get into these investments, and what confidence do they have at the outcome of this process? And I think that once this will be eased a little more than it is right now, it's going to evolve much faster.
That's a very important point. Yeah, Captain Simon Chip.
And I suppose once again I have to say my exposure to the Australian defence industry in India is limited. However, the interesting thing is when the Make in India policy was announced, it came at about the same time as a similar policy in Australia. So Australia has set a policy to become a defence exporting country as well. Very ambitious, but it kind of butts heads a little bit with Make in India. So we have to do the same thing that Dan was talking about. We have to convince Australian companies that if they want to come here and do business, they have to be very aware, and we have to put them through an education program in certain respects about Make in India.
So in that domain, it seems Australia and India, both in the specific domain of defense manufacturing, are almost at the same track.
Well, no, I think, India is very much ahead with respect to defence industry. Yeah. Ours is a fairly nascent industry. I spoke about the shipbuilding industry before, but when you look at other aspects, they're very niche capabilities that we're looking to, or that they're looking to exploit.
Okay. Colonel Dumont, do you want to come in here?
Yeah, I just wanted to add it, but for me, if we are looking not only about the defense sector, what is behind all of this? This is employment. This is education for all the young people coming, and we know that in India, every year, every day, there is some new young people like my boys, and they need formations, they need educations, and they need jobs. So finally, we find a win-win agreement when we propose this kind of transfer of technology, incitating to push our companies to come investing and establishing in India, because we will develop our own capabilities, and we will try to push the educational part and also the formation part for all the young people in here.
Brigadier Thompson, I want to start a little new chapter here in our conversation as far as the DPP, which is the main book here, as far as all defense and strategic affairs aspects and decisions are concerned. Do you feel is the Indian MOD's DPP is correct? Is it right, or is it responsible for India being the largest importer in defense?
The DPP is something that I'd love to read and understand what it says, and I think we all would, but we don't. But here's a part of the conversation that's missing, Ash, because I've been involved in defence transformation in the UK and acquisition reform for many years, and I was the right-hand guy to the chief executive of our equipment and support agency before I came to India. And the bit that I've heard a lot about industry, and I've heard a lot about imports, I've heard a lot about partners in the conversation in India. But the bit I haven't heard is about how you create an intelligent customer, how you upskill your government organizations to be commercially literate, understand financial risk, understand business decisions, and therefore put a proposition together that is, that is industry focused. Because industry relies on cash flow, profits, and share price. And if you're not putting a proposition on the table to industry that satisfies those things in a way where you understand the share of risk between the two, then you can go not very far. And as you bring the private sector into your defense industrial base, what you will find is the profit motive in private companies will mean they'll run rings around the government organizations if the government organizations are not corporately literate and have the right, what we call knowledge, skills and experience to deal in the commercial world. So the questions about the DPP, what I'd say is you can have a long list of any capabilities you want, but if they're not a commercially viable proposition, then it doesn't matter how you organize your structure and how you organize your aspirations, you have to have a commercially literate conversation with industry. And that relies, and it chimes back a lot, I think, to what the Vice Chief was saying today, is as you start your defense reform process, when the Chief of the Defense Staff is appointed, and the logical moves and the reforms that will happen inside the Indian system, one of the strands of work has to be in your acquisition area, is to create corporately literate people who can talk to private industry on a level playing field in the commercial, in the contractual space, so that you get an awareness. One of the things I heard this morning was the talk of deferred profit for private industry, which is a very state-centric view of the world. You won't get very far with private industry if you try and keep the conversation in deferred profit space, because those industries will go elsewhere globally where profits can be made quickly. And I think that really, to me, signals the need for an acquisition reform understanding inside your defense reform programs of the future.
Yeah, Captain Daniel.
I'd just like to second what you're saying, sir. I completely agree with you. And I think there's an opportunity right now with the review of the DPP and the DPM and bringing those together to actually maybe institute some changes that have been discussed for a really long time. And I like very much that industry, the government of India is reaching out to industry to get some feedback on things that would actually improve those documents, particular regarding the offset programs, et cetera, and talking about valuation of transfer of technology, talking about pooled companies and also the banking of offset credits and the use of those credits and offsets. So I'm glad to see that the government in India is very open about those discussions. And I'd also like to say that the United States, and I'm sure all of our countries, would be very willing to work with India in the professionalization and working in a better commercial literacy when it comes to doing some of the when it comes to the acquisition core and the decision makers on their side. I know we've been in talks with India regarding having courses at our Defense Acquisition University in Ohio, and bringing some folks over from the Indian side to actually take courses there, maybe design some actual courses that are made for India, so we can you know, expose them to kind of some of the things that we've learned over the years about how to do just what the Brig was saying. So,
but is that yeah, Captain Simon?
Sorry, could I just jump in with respect to acquisition? I think it was pleasing this morning to hear the Deputy Chief of Army, I think, talk about a whole of country approach to procurement, what we refer to as like an enterprise approach to acquisitions. It's not just about defence when you buy something, because when you buy something, it generally comes with infrastructure as well. So it has to be across the board. If you're buying new helicopters, maybe new hangars come with it. So there's an absolute new infrastructure requirement. So it takes an enterprise approach, or a whole of government, not just central government, but state government, local government approach to what you're doing with respect to that acquisition.
Okay, so it seems the worldview is pretty satisfactory. At the same time, Indian government needs to do a lot in terms of taking it forward in terms of the rate of change and the reformation that is taking place. But there's a dire need of quickly reforming and modernize the Indian forces, and this is specifically when you talk about the CDS and the unifying commands and all those aspects are taking place. It can't go the same way as it has been going for the last 70 years, because it now needs the best edge and the highest technology as soon as possible. On that front, is the strategic way or the case-to-case basis, going by a B2B or a G2G or a strategic partnership, is that going to be the way forward? Like, instead of having a fixed rule book or a DPP, go by the case-to-case basis. You got a aircraft carrier offer, you got a few missiles offer, you got fighter jets offer, you got a lot of other offers from US, from every other domain. Is it going case-to-case basis going to be the faster way? Because now the time for the Indian forces is to get the best as soon as possible. Yeah.
As always, it's not black and white. There's no one very obvious answer. I think you have to have a backbone of organized rules and literacy and methods. Yet on the other hand, you have to be flexible enough to look at a case-by-case basis when it's needed, and to make the proper adjustments. Because usually the rules and the books take a lot of time, and they're great for a lot of things, usually for most of the things, not just a lot of things. But you have to be flexible, dynamic enough, especially with the operational needs that India has, just as much as all of our countries nowadays have. The arenas are becoming more and more challenging, and the demand to get solutions fast. And solutions can be technology, and it can be other things as well. It can be structures, it can be units, it can be a lot of things. So you need to be walking on the foundations of set rules, but be flexible enough to adjust them when needed.
So since we talked about the CDS and the reforms that are taking place, do you feel India is ready for the CDS and the theatre command structure? It's obviously a gradual process, and most of the countries you all are representing do have the theatre aspect. Indian forces are still struggling to get the best edge in terms of the platforms and the technology. There's no doubt about the capability of the manpower and the training and the ethics and the professionalism. That's there. But in terms of platform and the reforms that are taking place, is India ready for the CDS and the theatre command? Captain Simon.
As you quite rightly pointed out, most of us, we work within a defence organisations back at home that are very much joint. However, certainly from an Australian perspective, it took us about 35 years to get there. there was review after review after review until we got to the point where we are now, where there is still more work to be done. However, we still consider ourselves very much a joint force. We do have a Chief of Defence Force who works within a diarchy, in a diarchical arrangement, in that he's exactly the same as the Secretary, the Defence Secretary, same powers. However, he is the principal military advisor to the Minister. And under him, the Chiefs of Service and a Commander of Joint Operations. The Chiefs of Service only have a responsibility to raise, train and sustain Navy, Army and Air Force units for operations, because those units are given to CJOPS or the Commander of Joint Operations. They're force assigned to take them away on operations. Now we're only a very, very small force. Providing advice to an armed force of nearly 1.5 million is very difficult. The fact that it took us 35 years to get there, I would indicate that it's a long road, but probably going to be a long road ahead, I think, for the Indian armed forces to become a truly joint.
Okay, Brigadier Thompson, we share, as far as India and British armies and the historical aspects are concerned in military domain, we share a lot. Indian Army still follows most of it. So you must be the most aware among all the panelists in terms of the traits and the characteristics of the Indian Army. And now we just heard earlier in the day the COSC, General Bipin Rawat. Is Army ready? Is India ready for the CDS structure?
Yes, but again it comes back to patience. This isn't a generational change program. This is a two-generational change program, and it needs to be judged in that scale. Our experience is that you prime it by going in joint education first, and it takes 5 to 10 years really for that kind of joint education to bed in and to build a generation of officers who are comfortable with it. The forces of resistance, we share a common start point in terms of where we're starting on the joint journey. We're at different points in time, but we share the same start point. And the forces of resistance that are inbuilt into our structures are common. We have a regimental system. That brings a great deal of conservatism and resistance into the change process. And you need to set out on the process with a firm understanding of that. Some of the things that make your armed forces professional, elite, with a very strong esprit de corps, are the very things that will make the change program difficult to execute. So it's a two-generational program, but the various blocks do start with education, then from education to training, and then I think to operational working together, and then finally to how you do your joint force development together. And I'd also add that it's not just about how the Army, Navy and Air Force operate together. It's how the Army, Navy and Air Force come together with the bureaucracy, because the bureaucracy has to go through its change program to support the services change program, and then how you take your defense industrial base with you. So you have to look across all of those areas, understand that the forces of resistance are strong, have a realistic time frame for the program, and you need to take people into the change program with the right competencies. Change managers and managers of change are a unique capability in the business world. We don't breed them instinctively in the armed forces. We breed people who are instinctively conservative and traditional and respecters of tradition. That's a very difficult thing for that kind of person to do. So eyes wide open, ready for it. I'd also say that the theatre command proposition and the CDS, you talk about them in the same sentence. They don't necessarily have to be. How you organise your operational outputs, it's not a given that you have to go theatre commands. I know it's a favoured route for the Air Force, for the Navy and the Army, but not perhaps for the Air Force. There's a sensible debate there to be had. But India's ready. India's just got to be realistic about it.
That's a very fair point. But in terms of the need, as Brigadier Thompson mentioned, that there could be a different way from CDS to need not go to a theatre, but for example, now we have the IBGs, the integrated battle groups that are being developed, and in terms of the theatre and the other capabilities, got to have a lot of expenditure capabilities, because the transformation is not going to come easy and cheap. It's going to cost a lot to the fastest growing major economy. Colonel Dumont, in terms of the CDS, the theater command, if it happens, even if it doesn't happen, a lot of unifying aspects will take place. What kind of impact do you see that happening on the platforms, on the defense platforms and equipments? Do you see that the need for the Indian forces will go down because there's going to be a lot of common aspects that will be taken care?
What can I say? I will escape your question. I will escape your question and come back on the first, but the previous one. Okay. You ask if India is ready for a CDS, for reforms. I think the answer has already been answered. You had a committee review, Kargil committee review committee, sorry. We had the same things after the first Iraqi war. And we have to transform totally our system of armed forces going to a joint structures, CDS. And as Gavin was saying, it's not easy. It's not one day to another one that you can do this. It takes times. But if there is a willing, and if there is a big lesson learned, you have to do it. So I think India is totally aware, the Indian forces are totally aware that they need to go this way. If you just read the book about the Kargil Review Committee, it's perfectly clear. It's a very good report. And it's also, when you look about a lot of articles of some people, maybe some people working in the press here have written some of them, it's perfectly described what could be done or not. There is a lot of options. So there is no one good way. The American system is one, because they have huge troops. Simon has described another one, which is, of course, maybe more adjust to, I would say, limited forces or smaller format. My system is a little bit different also, because it's not so huge forces, but very expeditionary. We have, at the time, it's a little bit different now, but same system as UK. So, to come back on your question, because I cannot escape totally, platforms, I think it will be a result. It's not an aim in itself. I think, I will give another example, is we cannot escape about the question is why to do this. Because you have to answer to some, how can I say, challenges. We can say some threat. Threat sometimes is a word that it's maybe too strong, so people avoid to use this. If you just look about China, I will speak frankly, China is your northern neighbors. They went to joint structures. They do it for some very pragmatical reasons. I'm sure that India also is looking about changing its structures, because they have to respond to many challenges. Yeah. Not only China, but also the freedom of navigation inside the Indian Ocean. So there is some aeronautical capabilities, maritime capabilities. So you have to do this. And finally, to come back again to your questions, platforms. The acquisition of platforms will be impacted, or has to be impacted by the reforms. Why? I will take the example of the Rafale. I will not say that Rafale is better than an F-35 or a Typhoon. Or Dassault was part, France was part of what we call the program Joint Future Aircraft, I don't remember exactly the acronym, with the other European countries. We have lived it, and finally we create the Rafale for two reasons. At this time we wanted a multi-role aircraft. Finally the history gave us reason, but that's it. But for another reason, which is linked with your question, because we wanted a common platform for Navy and Air Force. And also, why? Because we don't have so many budgets, we don't have the same scale of forces like the US, and we need to be efficient. Efficient in the sense that we cannot afford a big budget with no real effect on the ground. So we decided to equip the Air Force and Navy with the same fighter. And we try to have a lot of things like that. Sometimes it works, sometimes it's more difficult, but finally there is an effect, and now all the procurement system in France is based on the global approach, on the challenges, on the threats, and we have to answer this.
Okay. As far the theatre command is concerned, Captain Pillion, you know, US is in terms of is the most mature, I would say, in terms of the theatre operational aspects and the dominance and the projection in the real theatre aspects. And when you have these unifying aspects taking place in Indian military, do you see this happening some kind of impact on the platforms here?
I mean, it's a decision obviously India's going to have to make, and I think you know the decision, from what I can see of the debate happening within India, it seems like it's going that direction, and it's probably a good thing. I'll just mention 3 points. Going back to your last question for the colonel here, I think that the way the U.S. military looks at platforms is and really actually weaponeering at all, is we try to design the weapon for the threat. So when you develop a theater commands, those theater commands are probably geographic to some degree. I mean, the United States, we have 6 geographic commands. We have 3 functional global combatant commands, we call them. The platforms that we use in different theaters are not necessarily the same. We have a great deal of standardization across our military just for the sake of efficiency and for whether, but how we apportion those assets in different parts of the world are very tailored to the threat we face in those different areas. And so you do have to consider what type of equipment you're going to need to do that, and balance with that the efficiency that can be gained from you know, commonality across different things. I would say that my other point referred to some of the challenges you face with theater combatant commands, and one that we face ourselves quite frequently. One is it goes back to the apportionment of assets. A theater commander is always going to want more assets in its theater, in his area of operations. And honestly, the role of our chairman and our joint staff in the United States plays a very important role in actually determining the apportionment of those assets based on a global priority. And so I see that role in the CDS being one, perhaps, obviously, is one of an arbiter between the theater commands to determine what command needs to be able to get certain assets depending on the operations that it's doing. And because I guarantee you, and this is the case in the United States, demand always exceeds the supply when it comes to those forces. The second thing I'll mention regarding a potential thing that you need to watch out for if you're going to a theater command structure would be you create seams. You create seams within your country between these theater commanders. And we see this even in our own command structure with India. India is located within the Indo-Pacific Command, which is based out of Hawaii. It's on the border with our Central Command, which is based back in Tampa, Florida, but really covers your neighbor to the west there. This can create issues. I think we've done a lot of work to make sure that the seam is minimized to as much as possible. But you need to think about this when you form your own theater commands, and how those seams will be mitigated, and making sure that they don't cause problems when you actually have to do operations across theaters, because your threat is never going to respect theater command seams. The threat is going to move all over the place, so you have to understand how you're going to work with that. So,
Colonel Asaf, you want to come in on the same topic?
Just 1-2 points to Gavin's first point. I think, first of all, the need to work in coordination and intra-connection within organizations is a global social issue. When you look at educational researchers about what our children should be learning in schools, the first 2 things that come up always is, one, to learn new things, and the second is to be able to work with other people and group work. And I completely agree with the fact that it all starts with military education. And the other thing that I agree with, and I think it's unfortunate, I don't think there's a question if India is ready for this or not. I think it's a necessity. And I think you can go with challenges that are becoming, as I said before, more and more challenging and more dynamic. And not only that they ignore the seams, they take advantage of them. This way, there's no way to deal with them without any joint and cross-working between the silos. You can't keep working in different silos because you just miss out.
Okay.
I have to agree. It is necessary. When you talk about platforms, I think the introduction of a CDS is hopefully would start to enforce contestability with respect to acquisitions. The CDS and his or her staff would be in a position to force contestability such that they gain the desired effect which the government wants. I think that would probably be one of the best outcomes of the introduction of a CDS.
Okay. That brings me to the last couple of topics. When we're talking about Make in India, and Prime Minister Modi has been emphasizing a lot in terms of making India a $5 trillion economy in next few years. It's not going to be practical possible without defense economy playing its major chunk as far as the contribution to India's economy is concerned. Do you see India having developed that capabilities, or at least in the process of doing so in immediate future, where the two-way business as far as the defense is concerned is practically possible? We know that India is still not there in terms of the manufacturing capabilities, but as most of you have been mentioning, it has a lot of niche areas where it is much ahead, or it's pretty good, right, from the missiles for that matter. It is pretty good. Space is the other area, and the shipbuilding is pretty good enough, if not the best. Is there a possibility of a two-way business in terms of the defense economy taking place between the two strategic partners or the military partners? I'll start with you, sir.
I mean, I think the issue of how business is conducted isn't a state conversation necessarily. Business will go where business finds profit, it finds it easy to do business, where it finds business advantage. And I think, as you say, there are pockets of excellence in all countries, and there are pockets of excellence in India. So there's no inhibitor to that happening. Business will find it and make that happen. I think to try and write it into the contracts at a government-to-government level is probably not the best thing. But I do think that as you find more and more conversations going on with foreign countries as they come in, as they explore the defense corridors, as we've done, we've been down to Tamil Nadu and we're going to Uttar Pradesh, and we take industry there. As we do that, they find pockets of excellence. One of the competitive advantages you have is that your lower labour costs do mean that there's a big drive for people to move supply chains to India.
President Macron, and they spoke to the Israeli leadership, Netanyahu. But in case of US, it's primarily on B2B level, and not much of G2G aspects are involved in terms of the pure procurement. So there has been a lot of varying aspects as far as the recent defense procurements in India is concerned.
Not sure I exactly follow the question. What's exactly the question?
As earlier speakers mentioned, that in terms of the partnership and the two-way business deals, that's not the way where Indian government is currently going. A lot depends on the leadership, not only just the Indian, but their counterparts as well. We don't see many times that Prime Minister Modi and US President Donald Trump are speaking on phone in terms of the bargain aspects of the defense acquisitions, but it does happen in case of your leadership and in case of French leadership. So how do you see that happening? That will certainly keep area just focused on G2G level only, and there have been a lot of variety with the US, for example, the Apaches and the recent ones, Chinooks, have been B2B. So how do you see this entire mix happening and where it's leading to?
I think, first of all, I agree with all my predecessors because it's all a matter of a business decision. And it goes back to if the processes and the DPP allows it to be a profitable business, that's one thing. If how much of the industry would want to go into this for their own reasons, not because it's mandatory, but because they understand the profit from it. And once you get those flowing, then the opportunity for good business decisions as long as with exports to third countries, third, fourth, fifth, and sixth countries. And then when you have those, you have the infrastructure for doing all sorts of businesses, B2B, G2G, depending on the products, depending on the technologies. And right now, I think we're in the transition stage, where Make in India was launched fairly recently. A lot of companies have gone into this for the mandatory reasons to begin with. Yeah. And now we're in the transition of these new corporations, these new factories, actually getting projects going with the Indian forces. As a start, it was mentioned this morning that before you can go and sell to third countries, you need to have your own forces use the abilities. And I think right now we're in the transition period. And the shorter the transition, the more effective the process is going to be at the end of the day.
Okay. On that note, I would throw the floor open for the 1 minute closing remarks from each of you, in case we have not covered or you want to mention something specific. And I assure you, it's being broadcast live, and everyone who needs to hear is watching it and hearing it.
I'm not going to say anything new. All I'm going to say, I'm just going to reiterate what I've said. What you're stepping out to do is not easy. It'll take time. There's an urgency in the Indian system, which is understandable, but be patient. You're going in the right direction. Some of your initiatives are written very much from a state perspective. You need to read them and review them and write them from a business perspective so that business is attracted to the area. Be patient. Don't expect things to happen quickly. Don't get frustrated when they don't. Talk to partners who've been through the process before. Learn what you can along the way. But we understand the need for the defense industrial base in India to play a big part in the economy, and we're all here to help that as far as our nations will allow us to.
To try to make it very short, I will say that India is in a process of reforms. These reforms are necessary, for sure, but not because it's the time especially, it's because all our systems in our countries, for example, are also in reforms. This is maybe one of the characteristics of the structure of the armed forces. We have to to make some reforms permanently. If you don't adjust to the situations, to the new challenge, you just die. So you will not be able to go to modern warfare. So all the reforms have to be global. It's not only about the army or air force or navy. It has to be a global reform. And I will just come back, just to conclude, about what I said at the beginning, is that why I discovered the same kind of mind in India than in France, despite of our difference of culture of everything, is because we have this strong willing of autonomous strategy. In NATO, sometimes France, my country, is looking a little bit like a black sheep because we want to have our autonomous appreciation, autonomous vision of the situation. I don't say it's good or bad, it's just like that. We have this kind of mind, and we have seen that in India. You were supposed to be in a non-alignment situation. I think it's more than non-alignment. This is a whole term. It's just this autonomic strategy which is all the time driving you. And I think it's a good thing.
Captain Dan.
Well, sir, I agree with you. I understand India wants to be strategically independent, but I think all the people up here on the dais definitely want to see India succeed, and the reason is because in the overlapping Venn diagrams of our interests, we see that there is room for cooperation in a strategic sense. We want to see India modernize so that we're able to work with India to meet common challenges and common threats. We think, as far as I can speak for the United States, when we think about the capabilities that are going to India and the capabilities that India is procuring, it's about the capabilities India needs to fight together if we have to. Hopefully we don't, but if we ever do, the commonality, the interoperability that we can gain is something that we're very interested in, and we definitely like to help India improve. So, thank you.
Colonel Saab.
Just to keep it short, I think, first of all, I think we're very fortunate not only to be sitting on this stage in this day here, but we're very fortunate to be here in India and take part in this transition period, because it's really big change from the past to the future. And like every transition, it takes patience, and it takes guided rules. It takes leadership, and it also takes. There's a need to find the shortcuts when needed. And I think we're very fortunate. I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
So,
I think we're all in screaming agreement. I think, Indian armed forces are ready for a change, but to use naval parlance, it's going to be like turning a battleship. It's going to take a long time. We in Australia are obviously standing by to contribute where we can. You just have to look at a chart, once again using naval parlance, to see where we're both physically situated in the Indian Ocean. It just makes eminent sense that we're partners, and that's our aim, to be a valued strategic partner to India in the region.
thank you. On that note, I thank all of you. What a power-packed defense attaches panel. All the top allies of Indian government, the defense attaches from those countries. Thank you so much to each of you for participating and coordinating. And I also, again, take this opportunity to thank all your embassies and the high commissions for letting this happen. It doesn't happen very frequently. Thank you so much. Thank you.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.